Welcome back to the second installment of our Frameworks and Assessments series. Today's installment is about how to do, not necessarily just how to think about what you want to do. Now, the first installment really dealt with the neuroscience of safety. Today, we want to talk about the pathways to goal achievement. Today, we speak about the GROW operating system, the pathway for whatever purpose, whatever intention, whatever goal you have to its manifestation, and ultimately to the true unlocking of human potential. The framework itself is really about reprogramming your inner self. If you think of the first installment, which was SCARF, right, which dealt with status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. This one deals a little bit more with those performance barriers, those internal things that stand in the way of you achieving the things that you want to achieve. Things like self-doubt, distractions, those anxieties and fears and threats that are so well spoken to in the SCARF framework. This particular framework was developed by three, I suppose, the corporate consultants or corporate coaches in the 80s. So John Whitmore, Graham Alexander, and Alan Fine, who really were just trying to deal with performance management. But at the foundation, Timothy Galloway's inner game methodology is what actually sourced or gave birth to this actual approach. So what does it stand for, really? GROW is a system, and once again, you might remember James Clear's assertion that really we fail or we fall to the level of our systems. So GROW is a system, it's an architecture for thinking. It's a very malleable, very flexible architecture, but it's an architecture all the same. And we'll deal with the letters first, and then go into a bit of detail as we go further. The G stands for goal. So we define where we're going. We define what we're trying to get to. And the idea really is to try and do it the smart way, where the goals are not airy-fairy. The goals are actually anchored in very clear, distinctive objectives with very clear timelines and very clear and measurable outcomes. Once the goals are set, then you can really get a sense of where you are, the reality of things, where you objectively map where you currently are. And this, you'll find, it's iterative, because once your goal, your problem definition has been concluded, it might feel like you're done, but actually problem definition is usually the hardest thing. It's usually quite hard for you to understand what the pain you're dealing with, because the goal really addresses the pain. It addresses something that is present that you don't want to be present in your life, or missing that you want present in your life. The reality of it refines it. I remember once there was a very interesting little parable about this lady who wanted to get a good man and rattled off all kinds of characteristics, and got the good man, but the good man wasn't very good looking, and she was very unhappy. But it's because it wasn't well defined. She wanted a good man, good money, blah, 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 but didn't actually talk to the looks, and apparently the looks were quite important to her. Once the reality has been dealt with and the baseline set, The options are what one engages with. And now, if you remember, or if you may well be aware, in SCARF, there's autonomy. And autonomy is about, if you're a leader, a parent, a boss, it's about creating options. It's about optionality, making sure that there are enough choices, enough appealing choices for whomever is, engaged in the process of growth, performance of whatever nature, task of whatever nature. Options really expand your possibilities. In an ideal world, optionality without constraints creates so many more ways of doing things than one would think. Then finally, it's the will, or the way forward, still a W. And this is where you commit to action, and you really want whatever it is that you've set as a goal, whatever reality has intervened to refine that goal, whatever options you've come up with that can eventually become a way of doing things, a way forward, you then implement. Right? So that's what will stands for. Now, if one goes into even more detail per phase, the first phase is about activation. So it's about the actual goal itself. And as mentioned before, the idea is the goal must be smart. It cannot just be an airy-fairy woo-woo goal. It must be smart. And in that world, you then want to make sure that the goal is not just a short-term goal only, especially within the context of where you are working on something that is about either legacy or purpose. You want the goal to cover the short, medium, and long term, right? And from a psychological perspective, this almost primes you. It gets you excited. And once again, if you are au fait with SCARF, within SCARF, there are threats and rewards. If you are expecting or anticipating a reward, your cognitive state is positive. Your psychological energy is up, right? And it all ends up with trying to ask the question, what is your ideal legacy? What does it look like? And if you can answer that and answer that fairly succinctly, then you're on your way. Once you've decided, then we speak about reality, your starting point. There is another framework that is in the venture construction or venture building space called effectuation, where you start with the bird in hand. So in this case, what is your bird in hand? Where are you? And ideally, you want to be as objective and as honest as is possible here, because this, if you try and jip and cheat reality has a fantastic way of smacking you upside the head and reminding you who's boss. So you want to actually get to verified facts, not assumptions, not emotional interpretations, things that are the reality of things. And once again, from a psychological perspective, this creates for you truth. It creates for you those things that you might not necessarily be willing to see. Reality can be prickly at times, and we create, ways of being heuristics that effectively hide things from us so that we don't have to deal with the emotional fallout, or we don't have to deal with them being threats to us. And here, what you really want to be able to do is answer the question how aligned your life is with the goal that you've set in the first phase. And this will give you a sense of just how much work you need to do. And it might be such that if you have already started on your way, what is getting in the way of you doing or getting to the things that you want to get to? Once that is clearer to you, then we start talking about the options as indicated before. And the idea is to create as many possibilities as is possible. And as time goes on, you will be able to whittle some of these away so that you'll get to the options that are feasible, align with reality, and align with your goal. And once again, this is about that exciting creative process that unlocks those creative juices. And then also gets away from the habituation. If you are not new to the channel, you might have seen something about multipliers, habit multipliers. If you have zero negative habit multipliers, you typically are always iterating in the same place. And here we're trying to make sure that you bypass that. You don't iterate in the same place. You think of the craziest options as possible. And this removes whatever mental blocks. It also removes some of those things that tell you, no, I cannot deal with this. It's too hard. It's impossible. I'm not good enough. Typically imposter syndrome type stuff. So here, maybe a question to answer is remove all constraints, time, money, and then figure out how your purpose could or would be expressed. Will, or the way forward, is now where you take the option chosen or the options chosen and you make them into action. And once again, this is about SMART. You can look up SMART. It's going to give you a very good and clear understanding of how one actually sets achievable goals. This phase is about all of the stakeholders, the moving parts for whatever goal you're trying to achieve. So this is where, if it's a person that you require, who that person is, if it's a what that you require, etc. Psychologically, especially if you've lined it up with SMART goal setting, a good, strong reality check, a variety of options, it keeps you almost believing that implementation is going to get you to where you need to go. Now, this last bit is just about if you are coaching someone that needs help and this is the framework that you're using, you'll not let them move on until their actual rating on a scale of 1 to 10 is above 8. If the scale, and it's a judgment call, subjective judgment. If you believe as a leader, coach, parent, that person actually has not set realistic goals, has not really anchored themselves in a current reality, and they keep reframing into other realities that they want to be in, not the one that they're in. If the options that are being spoken to and spoken about are not actually well thought out or implementable, then you iterate, you go back and you start again. Now, the diagnostic, which is one of the things that I'm quite interested in making sure that you internalize, the diagnostic is as follows. It's the questions that you will be asking yourself that hopefully can create these prompts that bypass those prickly things that create informed resistance for you and give you the actual insight, will trigger the insights that you need. So from the goal phase, what does success look like? And it needs to be SMART. I'll keep reiterating this because it's fairly important that the goal that is set is not just a woo-woo goal. It's actually a fairly strong, quantifiable, time-bound goal. And how do you measure the progress? Because it's quite good and well to have a goal, and the goal is the ending. But if you don't have milestones, you might then start working on motivation as opposed to working on achieving specific goals. Finally, this is where you then get to the end state. What is the actual ideal end state? If you could mess around and David Copperfield yourself into the future, what would that look like? What would the outcome of what you're trying to achieve look like? The second phase, which is the reality, it really asks you to be very frank and clear about what's happening right now and the evidence of what's happening right now, not just what you feel is happening right now. And if this is not a new process for you, or if it's a process that comes out of you having been frustrated by trying other things in the past, what have you tried? And why did it fail if it failed? What were the results? And in that world, what is it that went wrong? What was in your control? What wasn't in your control? What is in your control now? What isn't in your control? The third phase is the options. Given infinite resources, what would you try? Now, I actually shared this with a very good friend of mine, and I said, if you had $3 billion, what would you do? It was funny because they started talking about very specific tasks that they, engage with on a daily basis. But this grow framework is not about staying in the same place. It's not about standing still. It's about actually moving yourself beyond where you are and into the space you intend to be, or at the very least, on the path there. It's always helpful to have role models. If not role models, at least they talk about the 5 people around you typically influence your motivation, your intentions, etc. And in this case, the question really is about if you've got a council of advisors or a very strong advisor, if you've got a real mentor and a theoretical mentor, what would they do? And in this path, for you to understand the cost of the options, because most things are trade-offs, right? So the cost of this option that you might end up choosing typically will go through a filter of choosing from many other options and settling on that one. To choose from or to separate the many other options, you might consider the idea of what the trade-offs are in the other options and choose the one where the trade-offs suit you. And then once all of that is done, then you commit to an option. And if you're committing to a singular option, within the SMART context, you still have to be clear about what it is in a quantifiable way and when do you get to it, so that you have a very clear timeline. If it's a series of goals or a series of options rather that get you to your goal, the sequencing thereof, what does it look like and how does it work? And then what might be in your way? If you can figure that out, how do you get around it? And then finally, going back to our 1 to 10 scale, if you were to assess yourself after going through G, R, and O, and now you're at W, is your conviction, is your will at 9 and above? If not, start again. It's always quite important for most of us to understand that a lot of what we speak about is not new. There's quite a lot of frameworks that are out in the world that are very useful, that function within the context that we need them in. And I'm not going to go through these, but I will have this here, and maybe you can pause and go through them. And if possible, you can put it in the comment section, the ones you'd like to engage with further, either personally, privately, or within the context of the other frameworks and assessments that I'll be recording going forward. So what's lovely about the GROW framework is that it is expandable. You can expand the front end where you add what is a very specific topic, or a broader topic, which might necessarily be quite helpful with the definition of the problem that you're trying to resolve or solve. You can also expand the back end, and the expansion of the back end is with regards to very specific tactics that once you've figured out what your goal is, once you've figured out the reality or the context, once you've explored options and narrowed it to either one or a subset of options, and then once you've defined for yourself your willingness or a way forward, you can then start exploring or implementing specific tactics that will get you to reach your goal. And for you to remain consistent, you also will implement specific habits. And the idea is, once again, to really multiply what outcomes you want by making sure that you don't engage in negative or zero multipliers. You engage in positive and exponential multipliers. What's quite important is that even though the process or the framework seems fairly straightforward, it obviously is not. You do need to be fairly rigorous and somewhat circumspect of easy solutions in this particular space and endeavor. The first error, as it were, that you need to watch out for is the jumping to solutions. Problem definition is probably one of the hardest things that one can engage in. And the difficult part about problem definition is you really want to jump to the solution part, typically. But sometimes, if you are not clear as to what the real problem is, you might end up solving the wrong thing. So, in whatever context you're in, spend significantly more time defining the problem before you move on to defining the reality. The second part is about rigid sequencing. You don't want to get to the point where you effectively take GROW and really are interested in implementing everything in a stepwise manner. It's a framework. The idea behind it is it's supposed to assist you. It's supposed to get you to the point where you can refine and structure your thinking, which means you can move things around a little bit. The one thing I might have indicated earlier is that generally the reality part forces iteration, because albeit you might have a problem that's defined, when you actually get to the point of reality, reality forces you to need to have a reductionist approach and narrow the problem to something reasonably clear to you, which then means you can iterate. You might even get to the options part and actually realize the options that manifest or that you manifest imply a different goal. And then you might need to necessarily go back to the beginning and refine, not redefine, but refine your goal. The next bit is more, I suppose, for coaches. But once again, I think it applies even to parents. It applies to leaders. You don't necessarily want to provide the answers yourself if you're assisting someone who is in the process of getting to manifestation of their goals, because then they'll be manifesting your goal. What you actually want to do is to equip them and then effectively just stand by their side or walk by their side to the extent that you can, making sure that they get to the outcomes or outputs that they're looking for. Also, the goals must be, once again, in the context of SMART, very clear, quantifiable, and having a very specific timeline. So the fourth error is that of having vague goals. Finally, everything that we've kind of been saying coalesces here. Time is very important. You really do need to get to the point where all of what you're doing has a deadline. Otherwise, one can iterate until the cows come home, which is not going to be very helpful. So, as we finally get to the end of this second framework, grow is not about teaching. Grow is about getting your hands dirty in your own life. Those who might be assistants, leaders, or collaborators in another person's reaching or at least walking the path to their goals. Their role is just to hold space for clarity and help unlock that human potential that we spoke about, and helping others regain their agency and use their agency to reach the highest levels of success that they can. Thank you very much for staying with me, and let's hope that this particular framework has use for you in the future.